Are you recording? Hi, welcome to our recording of our of today's webinar on specially designed instruction. We are re-recording this because we had some technical difficulties with sound and I dropped off in the middle of the call. So we're going to re-record it. For those of you that joined us, thank you. For those of you who could not be here, you missed a really great in-person session with folks, but we are happy to send it out recorded for you.
Awesome. So just to kick us off again, my name is Rachel Burley and this is Krista Reed, and we're both program directors with the Ability Challenge. Today's session is focused on what is specially designed instruction and how can we design instruction that is meaningful, intentional, and legally sound for students with disabilities. So a little bit about me, I'm based in Nashville, Tennessee. Previously, I was a special education teacher at the high school level. Instructional coach, dean of students, various other roles in special education, but now here at the Ability Challenge.
And I'm Krista Reed, and my background is also in special education as a special ed teacher and then building and network district level special ed leader.
So this is our first session on SDI. We're going to be talking about design. Next month, we'll be digging into delivery, and we're excited to have you all listening today. All right, so a little bit about our organization. Here at the Ability Challenge, we partner with schools, districts, and networks across the country to strengthen inclusive instruction, IEP quality, and systems that actually work for teachers and students. So our work is grounded in the Thrive framework, which is an evidence-based roadmap for the knowledge, mindsets, and practices required of leaders and educators to create the optimal conditions for diverse learners. And so when we think about specially designed instruction, it sits right at the intersection of all of those things. And it's how we make sure that all learners are making meaningful progress. So here's where we're headed today. We're going to start by defining SDI, then look at how we design it, practice identifying it through various scenarios, and then we'll close with a reflection and Q&A.
Well, we did have Q&A. We'll voice over those.
Awesome. So to kick us off, when we think about specially designed instruction, there's a lot of words that might come to mind, maybe individualized, maybe targeted, maybe adaptive, strategic. There's many. And so we're curious if you're listening, what's one word that comes to mind for you? And then we'll actually revisit this question at the end of our session to see if that word changes. So we're going to talk about what specially designed instruction is and how it officially connects to special education. So we'll start with the official definition, which can be found in IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. They tell us specifically what SDI is. So it reads, STI is defined in the IDEA as adapting as appropriate to the needs of an eligible child under this part, the content, methodology, and delivery of instruction, to address the unique needs of the child that result from the child's disability and to ensure access of the child to the general curriculum. So that's a lot, right? Um, in the heart of it all, what it is saying is specially designed instruction is what makes special education special for students. So a student that is found to be in need of SDI means that they don't just need accommodations, which they could get under 504, but they need something specially designed for them. So we're going to talk more about what that could be. We want to reiterate here that the purpose of SDI is to ensure that students with disabilities can access the general education curriculum and make meaningful progress and meet the same academic standards as their non-disabled peers. So this is really the how. So SDI is tailored to each student's unique needs as outlined in their individualized education program or in their IEP. So one place that teams often get stuck is mixing up UDL, differentiation, and SDI. So when we talk about UDL, we're talking about a proactive design in lessons that design lessons with fewer barriers for as many students as possible. So that could be in a variety of ways, but UDL is a proactive strategy. When we talk about differentiation, we're talking about being responsive to groups of students. So, what do various groups of students need? But what's different about SDI is that it's individualized and it is the only one that is specifically for students with disabilities. It's also legally required under IDEA. So, this is where we're living today.
This is a good time to bring up a question that came up at the end of the session because we're looking at these words right now. Someone had brought up, I'm having a hard time explaining to people the difference between differentiation and SDI. Like a lot of times, teachers that I'm working with are saying, but I'm already differentiating for him. So, like, what are you asking me to do? I think throughout the rest of the call, the what are you asking me to do will become a lot clearer. But pausing here for a minute to say, if differentiation was enough, then we probably would not have been in a position to say this student is eligible for an IEP under IDEA because they clearly need something more than that. They need more than what we're doing. They need individualized adaptations in order for them to have meaningful access and progress in the gen ed curriculum. DI and UDL are things that we should be doing in the design of our lessons for any kid all the time. Like it's what makes tier one instruction really high quality and accessible to most kids. And then there are kids who have disabilities who need something more than that, right? They need something that addresses the unique barriers that arise because they have that disability that they're eligible for. So if we think of differentiation as just like, doing different things for different kids as sort of an umbrella term, sure, then SDI is a layer down to say it's not just differentiating and giving kids a few options or even, trying
Graphic
to adjust our
organizer.
teaching. Right. Just adjust give kid this graphic organizer or they could use this one. It's saying because the student has a visual impairment, they're going to need an enlarged one. It's that level of specificity that goes beyond what is often considered differentiating instruction.
And so when we think about which of these three do teachers at your school use most often, what we saw a lot of in the chat was differentiated instruction. So that is something we're seeing a lot in schools. And if you are differentiating instruction, that's a great start. This takes it one step further.
When we think about that definition of SDI, it was a lot of like legal words, right? So to break it down in a really concrete way, what is SDI? What should it do? Number one, SDI is when we are describing the instruction that teachers will provide. So it's what teachers will do with intention and specificity. It is linked directly to the impact that a student's disability is having on their access or progress in the general ed curriculum. So it should result in increased access and progress. It should be based on research or evidence-based practices that we know will increase access for that student or progress for that student, right? So it's not just an instructional strategy that we're trying without any evidence that it would work. We're trying to pick the strongest strategies and approaches that we can because of what we know about the student and their disability. And then finally, it's pre-planned. We're not sort of like doing SDI on the fly. We're not adapting or differentiating after a student is unsuccessful. And then we're also collecting the data to continuously evaluate whether the choices we're making intentionally and proactively are working. So we thought this student would benefit from this type of instruction. The data suggests it hasn't. We've tried it for quite a few weeks. We're not seeing um, weeks, months, whatever the trial period is. We're not seeing growth. We might reevaluate the SDI that we're trying. We asked folks on the call to take a look at this chart because knowing what SDI is and then knowing what your role is in providing it is really important because common misconception is SDI is just the special ed teacher's job. Yes, they are the SDI experts, right? The special ed teacher is definitely leading the charge in collaboratively planning for that SDI. And they're mostly responsible for collecting that data and sharing it with other people. But everybody has a role to play. So whether you're an administrator, whether you are a general ed teacher, whether you're support staff, related service, paraprofessional, we all play a role in making sure that students get the instruction that they need to address their disability related needs. So finding your role on this chart and kind of looking to see like, does this reflect my reality? Are there things that I need to be doing? Am I already doing many of these things? And it's an important pause point. Just to stamp what we've been talking about, right? SDI, specially designed instruction, is a collective responsibility in a school, right? Kids make meaningful progress when everybody who's instructing them knows what they need and is understanding how their disability is impacting their access and progress. So when the gen ed teacher, the special ed teacher are all aware of what those students' needs are and can plan for those, kids are going to be more successful. And administrators play a huge role in creating the conditions for that type of collaboration and knowledge transfer and implementation in classrooms. We talked about this, like administrators making sure that there is enough time in the schedule for that type of discussion and collaboration and adapting. It takes time to adapt your content, your method, your delivery of instruction. So just stamping that this is not one person on a team's job to do. Let's talk about how we design SDI. This was in the definition, that IDEA definition that Rachel showed earlier. It said, SDI is adapting the content, the methodology, or the delivery of instruction for an eligible student under IDEA. So what does that mean? What do we mean by adapt the content, right? We mean the academic and functional instruction that is being taught to a student. What is the content that they are learning? The what of learning. Methodology is how the teacher structures and guides that learning. So it's the how, right? It's the methods, it's the strategies. And then delivery of instruction. I think we spend a lot of time talking about this in an IEP meetings, like where's the kid going to go when they get that? Are they going to do it in the gen ed class? Or are they going to get a pull out? Which teacher's going to do it? Even what time of day is it going to happen? We did not put who in here, but it is the where, the when, and the who of instruction. How it will be delivered, who will deliver the instruction. Oh, we did put who in the second part of the sentence. But we don't often connect all of these things together. Well, why does this instruction happen here and with this person? Like, how does that relate to what the content and methodology needs are for the student? So very like interdependent on one another, but separate considerations. And again, all of this is to make sure that kids are having greater access and progress and ensuring that they're meeting their IEP goals and the standards in the general ed curriculum. Um, I want to clear up a misconception is like we do not need to be adapting in all three areas for it to be considered SDI. If we are adapting the content, but using all of the same methods and doing no adaptation to the delivery of the instruction, it's still SDI, right? You don't need all components adapted for it to qualify. Maybe we are just changing the methodology and leaving the content exactly as it is for most other students. And just want to acknowledge that adaptations exist on a continuum, right? We can be doing an adaptation that is essentially a very small change, right? It's a minimal change to the methodology or to the content. Maybe we're adding a little bit of additional content for a student who has a hearing impairment, but we could also be on the farther end of this continuum, least to most adapted, and be making very significant changes to what or how a student learns based on their individual needs, right? A student who's on an alternative pathway to a diploma and is addressing alternative standards, that's a pretty major change, right? It's going to change most of the activities and most of the curriculum that they're exposed to during the school day. So just acknowledging that these can be various degrees of change for a student. Let's talk through examples of content adaptations. So again, content is the what students are learning. So based on the needs of a student that stem from their disability, maybe we're providing some targeted instruction on some prerequisite or foundational skills that they're missing. And by doing that, giving them More practice with those basic reading skills, helping them master basic reading skills, it's going to enable access, better access to the gen ed curriculum. Great. Maybe we're pre-teaching or reteaching key concepts. And so sort of that sequence of learning is a little bit changed for that student. Same with reducing or prioritizing a set of standards. A lot of times the alternative standards that students are addressing are essentially prioritize reduced set of standards um, with slightly lower levels of rigor. A student who is blind, right? By virtue of being blind, they're going to need to be taught content that is not available in the regular ed curriculum. They're going to be needed taught how to use Braille. So that's additional content that a student needs to be taught and to be learning because of the nature of the disability of blindness or low vision. Adding, they might need to learn how to use additional tools or technologies or assistive technology devices. So when we're asking ourselves about adaptations for a student, one of the first questions we should ask is, what are the academic or functional skills this student needs to be taught in order to address their unique disability related needs? What do they need to know or be able to do that's not already part of the general ed curriculum? The Braille example is like a perfect one. Not all, no students are going to learn Braille, right? But this student is blind and she has to. And so that is additional content that the student needs to learn by virtue of being a student with a vision disability. What functional areas are impacted by their disability, right? Students with autism have functional needs in the area of social skills. So we're going to have to teach content about social skills. Maybe that's the same or different than the content that all students are being taught about social skills, right? It might depend on their age. What additional knowledge or skills are required for the mastery of the student's IEP goals, right? In addition to access and progress in the gen ed curriculum, what else do we need to know and what else do they need to know and be taught to meet their individual IEP goals? So these are the questions that teens can ask to get underneath of the content needs that a student might have. We're hearing more and more about folks saying, yes, my students have knowledge gaps and they have skill gaps. But what I'm really seeing hold them back from progress and access in the gen ed setting or in the general ed curriculum in general is really these executive functioning skills. So when we think about functional skills and functional needs areas, these are the ones that are coming up the most often, right? Flexible thinking, the ability to self-monitor, the ability to plan and prioritize, task initiation and perseverance, right? Impulse control, organization, social emotional skills. These types of executive functioning skills are also additional content that students may need because of the nature of their disability. Now we're going to switch to another type of adaptation we might make, right? Methodology adaptations. We said this is the how of learning. So these are adaptations to how learning is structured or guided, using explicit instruction with clear modeling and think alouds, right? One of those high leverage practices that we know generally, kind of a cross-cutting strategy for students with disabilities. Adding multisensory routines, providing extra opportunities for guided practice and immediate corrective feedback, visual scaffolds, checklists, teaching students to use graphic organizers, breaking tasks into smaller sequential steps, backwards chaining, using repeated practice cycles with increasing independence. These are the methods, the teaching methods, the way we structure learning that a student might specifically need because of the way that their disability impacts their learning. Might be the way that their disability impacts working memory, things like that. What should teams be asking and talking about? Rather than asking what a child needs to learn, now we're asking ourselves, how does this child need to be taught to address their unique disability related needs in the classroom? How are we going to teach them to increase that access and progress in the gen ed curriculum? Well, what does research say is the best way to teach this thing? Like, what does research say about the best way to teach social skills to students with autism who are in middle school? There's research about that, and we should rely on that to make these choices about methodology changes. What methods work best or have not worked for this student? Like, this is the continuously evaluated data part, right? We can have data about what works for an individual kid. and then what techniques are necessary to use for a particular instructional approach. So all of these guiding questions help a team get underneath of what are the methodology changes they might need to make.
So, the third type of adaptations that you might make for a student under SDI would be delivery adaptations. And so, when we talk about delivery, we're talking about who is delivering the instruction or where is the instruction being delivered. And so, one of the things that we see most often is the use of small group instruction during a general education classroom. We might see one-on-one instruction during an intervention or advisory period. Maybe it's a co-taught lesson where the special education teacher provides more targeted support aligned to students' needs in real time. And so, other changes could be using flexible scheduling to front load instruction before a whole group lesson, thinking through alternate environments that might reduce stimulation or increase focus for students, or even sometimes adding content or giving virtual or asynchronous practice modules aligned with in-class instruction. So thinking through how can we enhance our delivery, change our delivery in order to meet the students' needs. Some of the questions you might consider is when, where, or with whom does this child need to be taught to address the unique disability related needs that they have to ensure their access and progress in the general education curriculum? So questions you might consider: who's the best person to deliver the instruction? When and where should the instruction occur? What grouping would be most effective? How much time is needed? And how can we deliver this instruction to allow for sufficient practice with explicit feedback?
This is a place where we did talk about on the live call to confusion that we see a lot around SDI, right? Is misconception is the only person who can provide SDI to a student is a special education teacher. IDEA does not have an opinion about this. Your state might have an opinion about who can be considered eligible for like delivering special ed minutes on an IEP, but IDEA, or sorry, OSEP has given a lot of guidance about this question, right? And there's not a limit on who can provide SDI to a student. The decision about who can provide something that is considered SCI needs to be based on the individual needs of the student and then a consideration of who is the best position to deliver that instruction. So, concrete example, student with a specific learning disability in basic reading, they are a middle schooler. They need explicit, systematic, multisensory phonics instruction. You're not going to get that in a middle school classroom, in a reading classroom in middle school. But this school has a reading specialist, and they are very highly qualified to provide that type of instruction. And in fact, they pull a small group of kids who need that, right? This student absolutely needs that because of the nature of his disability in basic reading. Does that mean that instruction that reading specialist is providing is not SDI? Of course not. That is exactly what that student needs, and it is the SDI for him. And so the reading specialist, it's not as if like the special ed teacher needs to go and reinvent the wheel and do the exact same lesson for it to count as SDI. The reading specialist can deliver that. We are going to watch a video now. Axel is a bilingual fifth grade student with autism, but he does not yet have a reliable means of communication. He's new to the school, and teachers are still trying to figure out a lot about him and how best to serve him. He has an IEP goal that focuses on being able to identify some key details to support a given claim. So we're going to watch a lesson coming up where they are comparing two versions of Jack and the Beanstalk. And there goes my balloons again. Two versions of Jack and the Beanstalk. And so I just want you to watch the video. Rachel, go to the next slide real quick. You'll see a little picture, back one. You'll see a little picture. So the teacher has the Venn diagram set up, and the goal would be to engage the class in a discussion, like comparing and contrasting the two versions of the story. So that's what you'll see Axel getting ready to do. Um, and see how they have adapted this lesson to meet his individual needs that arise as a result of his disability.
Did they both chop down that Beanstalk did only the original story or did the trial? Can you point where it belongs? Where does it belong? Point. Yeah, put it where it belongs. Axel, where does it belong? Good job. Jack and his mother were very poor. Was that in both the original or the trial? Put it where it goes. Here. Good job. Both or the trial? Put it where it goes. Good job. They really started off from a point of saying, we think Axel is smart, capable of learning in our local school, capable of communicating lots of thoughts and ideas, but we don't presently understand exactly how to support him. But our starting point is going to be to think that he's smart and that our job is to put together the constellation of supports that will allow him to show that.
So we used a poll to see what folks thought, what type of adaptation were we seeing in the video? Was it a content adaptation? Was it an adaptation to the methodology or to the delivery of instruction? Overwhelmingly, the responses were methodology, with a few votes for delivery. The poll didn't let you vote for more than one, but we discussed how this giving him the large Venn diagram mat and having him use the sentence strips to place it where it belongs was an adaptation to the methodology, right? He still read the same stories. He was still comparing and contrasting the two stories. He was using the same, tool, graphic organizer as everyone else, but we adapted how he responded and how he um, was able to sort of utilize language in that lesson. And then the delivery, we thought it was interesting. We commented as a group of how he was working with his partner. Other kids were working with partners, but thinking that like maybe that specific partner or how directive she was being was what was really working for him with the nature of his disability. And so, thinking about like, well, what did the team likely discuss when they were deciding what to do with that lesson, right? Well, first they had to focus on his disability related needs. They said Axel is a student with autism, which means his disability significantly affects his verbal and nonverbal communication skills and his social interactions. That is the definition of autism in IDEA, and that's why he qualifies as a student with this disability. So these are sort of the functional areas that are impacted. How are we going to teach him to address those unique needs that he has as a result of being a student with autism? And so coming up with a different way for him to respond when he doesn't verbally or write for communication was something that they had to consider. And so they came up with this change to the methodology in the lesson, and I think it worked out really well. We discussed also how do you know, right? Like, and how do you use IEPs to help you know what content or methodology changes a student might need? And so we talked a little bit about SMART goals and how we write IEP goals that are time bound and specific and have criteria, right? So the example here is by the next annual IEP, Becca will verbally state the correct activity in 4 out of 5 daily trials across 3 consecutive days. What this team did really well was specify the conditions under which this would happen. So they said, when provided a visual schedule of their daily routine and asked what comes next, that's when Becca will verbally state the correct activity. So they've kind of created some clues about what type of instruction they think they will need to provide Becca in order for her to be able to be successful using a visual schedule as an aid. So you could see the content that Becca needs is content on how to use a visual schedule. The methodology by which they do this, again, they might do a little bit of research to say, what are some effective ways of teaching a student to use a visual schedule? And that might help give them some clues around the content methodology needs for a student who needs to accomplish this goal.
And
And so
so,
go
yeah,
ahead, you can stamp it.
just wanted to stamp what we've already covered is that STI is how educators adapt the what, the how, the where, the when, the with, the whom, for students with disabilities so that they can access, like Axel, general education curriculum and make meaningful progress there. Do you want to add anything, Krista?
No, I think The only other thing I would say that came up, right? SDI is about making changes to what, how, and where, when, and with whom students learn. And just thinking about that question of how's that different than differentiation? These are just different considerations than differentiation. In differentiation, there really is really no consideration to like if students are learning anything different content wise, right? We're talking usually about how to change how they get
Provide
there, but
access.
it's yeah, provide access or increased access, but we're never considering if there's additional things that students might need to learn. So I just keep coming back to that question because I think it's a good one. Now we're going to do some scenario practice. We're going to show you a few scenarios and want to remind you, right, of what SDI should be, right? We should be describing what teachers do. It should be clear how it's related to students' disabilities, and it should be able to increase their access to the general ed curriculum and have some type of research or evidence base.
So we're going to review four scenarios. You can follow along, but basically we're going to be deciding, is this SDI or is this not SDI? So as you listen to each of the scenarios, you can ask yourself, is the teacher intentionally providing instruction designed for a specific student? Does the scenario show an adaptation in content, methodology, or delivery? Is the instruction directly tied to the impact of the student's disability? All right, so keep those questions in mind. In our first scenario, student A is a second grader with a specific learning disability in written expression that affects his ability to produce complete sentences. In the general education classroom, the special education teacher provides a 5-minute mini lesson before writing each day. She models using sentence frames to write complete sentences before student A is expected to generate his own piece of writing. Is this SDI or not SDI?
When we gave the poll on the live call, most people, but not all, said that they thought it was SDI. And we explained that we agree that this is SDI. The teacher is intentionally adapting this lesson for the student by providing that mini lesson, right? And targeting that content for the student. Methodologically, right, there's explicit instruction, and the teacher is teaching a skill that the student does not yet have or that is impacted by their disability of written expression, right? Is unable or currently not able to write complete sentences. And so the sentence frame as a tool that we're trying to teach the student to use, we need to model that and provide that practice for the student. Now, eventually, hopefully, the student doesn't need a 5-minute mini lesson before every writing task or before every writing activity. Maybe they will just need sentence frames. So the SDI can fade into giving the student a tool, right? But for now, it's SDI.
Awesome.
Scenario.
Scenario two. Student B is a fourth grader with a specific learning disability in reading fluency. During independent reading time in the general education classroom, the special education teacher sits beside the student and reminds him to read out loud for 10 minutes and then whisper read for 10 minutes. She checks in every few minutes to ensure he stays on task. If he becomes distracted, she redirects him back to the text. Is this SDI or not SDI?
When we gave the poll, the majority of folks said this is not SDI. A few folks said maybe that it was, and so we ended up talking about this a little bit more, right? Um, this teacher is certainly providing monitoring and redirecting the student back to task. The student has a specific learning disability in reading fluency. So if we make the assumption that the student need in this lesson is reading fluency support, right? To grow and become more skillful in their reading fluency. This is not an evidence-based practice for that. And there's almost no instruction happening, right? The student is being sort of directed back to task, which Could be a support if their issue is staying on task, right? If we're talking about like the functional area of sustaining attention, but that's not what we're talking about. So just having kids read a passage multiple times does not itself reliably result in any gains in reading fluency. It's the instruction that matters, and some of those instructional techniques matter more than just redirecting the student back to the reading. Just doing it more often is not going to increase reading fluency. We asked folks, well, then what could she have done that would have been, right? Either a content or a methodology or delivery adaptation. Um, and so some of the things in the chat were, doing modeled reading or having the student do repeated reading, but with feedback from the teacher, right? About either their prosody, their accuracy, their rate, something like that, where the student's actually getting feedback and then eventually can do some self-monitoring. But that is not what we were seeing. So on the next slide, we had some more of those ideas of like, these are the methods, the methodology adaptations that we could make to actually support a student in reading fluency. Again, repeated reading with guidance or feedback, maybe choral reading with modeling and support, echo reading if the teacher wants to model fluent and expressive reading of that passage, a part of it, and have the student take over. Let me do the first two sentences so you can hear how I would read this with prosody and with the appropriate rate. Now you try the next two sentences. Maybe a partner reading situation, audio assisted reading. Reader's theater is really great for younger readers, or where it makes sense in the content for older readers, like plays. But yeah, those are some evidence-based strategies rather than just reminding the kid read it twice.
All right, on to scenario 3. Krista, did you want to read the scenario?
Sure, yeah. During
Go
whole
for it.
group instruction, the special ed teacher prompts student C to use pre-taught step-by-step inference checklist. She teaches him how to use the checklist by modeling the thinking aloud, even while the general education teacher leads discussion. During independent practice, she prompts the student to identify those clues, link them to their background knowledge, and generate an inference before responding in class. So really helping a student understand what an inference is and how we make one. So is this SDI or not? I think we had even more agreement on this one, didn't we?
I think it was I think it was 93% of
Yeah, that
people
sounds right.
said yes, this is SDI, and those 93% were correct. So the teacher is providing targeted instruction within the general education classroom that supports that the supports they're providing directly address the disability's impact on inferencing. So we would consider this a methodology adaptation that teaches a cognitive process necessary to access that grade level content. And you might have noticed the use of a checklist. That is a great accommodation and something that can be helpful for students as well. Do you want to
Yeah,
add
but
anything?
yeah, I would say it's an accommodation once we teach the child to use it, right? So the teaching the child to use a tool like that is the SDI. And
That
that's the
part.
whole point of SDI, right? We don't want to have to teach kids explicitly over and over and over again unless they need it. But like the goal would be that they could independently, with that instruction, eventually be making good inferences and maybe using a checklist to self-monitor back to those executive functioning skills, right? But we're going to have to model that for kids when they don't know how to do it as a result of their disability.
That part.
That part.
All right. Scenario 4. Student D is a fifth grader with a specific learning disability in math problem solving. He attends 20-minute daily math intervention block with the special education teacher. The teacher uses explicit instruction and the concrete representational abstract sequence to teach him how to solve multi-step word problems. She models each step, guides him through scaffolded practice, and gradually reduces support as he demonstrates mastery. Progress is tracked weekly, and instruction is adjusted based on data. Is this SDI or not SDI?
Think we had 100% agreement on this one. I
We
think everybody
did.
said, yeah, this is SDI. And we really wanted to shout out the teacher in this example because, not only are they intentionally providing instruction with a strong evidence base for a student with a disability in math problem solving, right? Like this, the CRA, concrete representational abstract sequence helps students move from a concrete understanding to an abstract understanding of a math concept for things like word problems. Like that is exactly what a student with math problem solving gaps needs. They're modifying the methodology and the delivery by doing this, probably in a smaller group, maybe individually in the math block. But the last sentence there, right? Tracking that student's progress weekly and then adjusting their instruction based on that data is exactly what makes SDI so powerful, right? We're able to make decisions about whether to continue a certain type of strategy or approach or whether or not it's not serving this kid. So shout out to this fake teacher. We wanted to stamp again, right? These are concrete examples of how teachers can adapt the what, the how, and the where, when, and with whom students are learning. But it starts with them really understanding what a student's needs are, right? They understand the impact that that disability is having on a student's access and progress, and they're sort of backwards designing a solve for it and saying, well, if this is how it's showing up, this is what we're going to need to do about it.
So that concludes our session for today. We thank you for viewing, and we're super excited for our next session, which will be about delivering SDI and practical instructional moves that create access for all learners, which will happen February 18th at 12 p.m. Eastern. So if you did attend our first session or registered, you are receiving this recording. The recording and resources for the next session will also be sent out via email, so feel free to register for that. And we look forward to seeing you all soon.
I would add a lot of folks on our call said, a lot of our teachers don't know this. Like again, we think we're doing SDI, but what we're really doing is differentiating. And so we said, this is a great one to tell your teachers to sign up for. Again, if they can't attend, if they're teaching during this time, they will get the recording. This might be one that you would want to attend if you're a leader so that you can really explain to teachers and break it down for them, bring it to their PLC, to their learning spaces. You could even watch pieces of the recording in chunks and talk about it. So, really encourage everyone from teachers to administrators to sign up for this one because I think we're going to break it down in even more practical terms of like, if this, then what? Which I
Yeah.
think teachers really need.
And if you enjoyed this session or enjoyed the next, you can also reach out to us. We do come to schools and provide training and professional development for teachers on these topics. And so we'd love to continue the conversation.
Absolutely.
Thank you all so much for your time and attention, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.